Hello everyone and welcome to another day of high yield USMLE concepts. Today we will be talking about Renin, Angiotensin and Aldosterone system. So this is one of the highest yield topic in the USMLE, all the USMLE step exams, particularly for USMLE step 1. This lecture we are going to talk about a lot of the mechanisms of how different things that are present in the Raas system act, the different signaling pathways that they are involved in, what is their end result, what the Raas system is all about. So all of this we are going to talk about in this video, and by the end of the video you will know most of the high yield content for the USMLE, especially USMLE step 1, everything that you need to know about the Raas system. So without further delay, let's talk about the Raas system. So now the first thing you need to know is when is Raas system get activated. So remember, there are three main triggers for the Raas system activation. The first by far is the decreased blood pressure. So remember, these are all the activators. So they will activate it. So first is decreased blood pressure. Second is decrease NaCl delivery to the macula densa, and we're going to talk about this little by little in a bit, all the macula densa and all of the other stuff. And then the third is beta 1 sympathetic stimulation, SNS stimulation, sympathetic nervous system stimulation, beta 1 receptor. Now once you have a low blood pressure, obviously you want the blood pressure to be elevated. So remember, when you have a low blood pressure, decreased blood pressure, two systems get activated. One is the baroreceptors. They respond, and they respond very rapidly. So if they say which one responds faster, is the baroreceptor system. So first is the baroreceptor. Second, we have the Raas system. So these two are going to act to increase the blood pressure. So remember, Raas system takes time. It's a slow system. First, this baroreceptor is going to maintain the blood pressure very rapidly, but after some time, Raas is going to take over because it takes time, but it's also a stronger system to maintain this blood pressure. Now, once the blood pressure drops, baroreceptor is the first one to act. So remember, it increases. There is decreased stretch on the baroreceptor that is sensed by the baroreceptors in the carotid and the aortic as a low blood pressure. Particularly, remember, the carotid baroreceptors are better and more accurate than the aortic baroreceptors. Now the carotid receptors are going to sense the decreased stretch as decreased blood pressure, and it's going to signal the brain that the blood pressure is low, and the brain in turn is going to increase the sympathetic nervous system activity. For example, it's going to cause, if there is increase of sympathetic nervous system activity, there is increase of alpha-1 activity, for example, it's going to cause vasoconstriction, and it's going to cause increased blood. It will increase the blood pressure. Remember, it also acts through a variety of other receptors as well, because the entire system is activated. So it's going to go to the heart and activates the beta 1 receptors and cause tachycardia. Also, because we said beta 1 stimulation is going to activate the Raas system, so it's going to also activate beta 1 receptors here on the GG cells, which we are going to talk about in a bit. So it's going to stimulate this Raas system. Beta 1 also is going to stimulate the heart and cause tachycardia. So this is the first way that the Raas system gets activated. Low blood pressure is the first. Low blood pressure itself activates the Raas system. Second, the beta 1 receptor. Remember, anything that activates the beta 1 receptor is going to activate the Raas system. Remember, if they say what is the link between beta receptor and Raas, the link is the beta 1 receptor. The beta 1 receptor is activated by the increased sympathetic activity due to low beta receptor stretch, and beta 1 receptor is going to activate the Raas system. The third mechanism is the decreased NaCl delivery to the macula densa. Now, let's talk about a little bit about the structure of how these things are built. So remember, this brown cells that you can see here, these are the JG cells. These are juxtaglomerular cells. Now, these juxtaglomerular cells, they will often ask, are they of what is the origin of these cells, like which type of cells they are. So remember, this is the afferent arteriole. Afferent arteriole is the arteriole that goes into the glomerulus, right? And this one is the efferent arteriole. Efferent is after the glomerulus. So before the glomerulus is the afferent arteriole, after is the efferent arteriole. So these juxtaglomerular cells are the special type of afferent arteriolar cells. So these are afferent arteriolar cells, and remember, these are the cells that release the renin. So anything that wants to activate the Raas system is going to cause these JG cells to increase the renin. Now, we have low blood pressure. Low blood pressure is going to stimulate these cells, these JG cells, to increase renin. For example, beta-1 receptors here are going to be stimulated by sympathetic nervous system and increased renin. Third, remember, these blue cells are macula densa cells. So these are special type of distal convoluted tubule cells. So now, once you have decreased NaCl delivery to the macula densa, it will sense the decreased NaCl delivery as decreased sodium state, or decreased volume state. Because remember, whenever you have low sodium, usually that means that the body is also low in water, in volume. So when the macula densa sense that there's decreased sodium in the distal convoluted tubule in the urine, it's gonna cause the renin-angiotensin system to get activated and reabsorb that sodium, so that the body retains more sodium, because decreased NaCl delivery means there is decreased NaCl in the body. So now let's talk about what happens. So these are all the stimulators, the activators that we talked about. Now let's see what happens when it gets activated. So let me just kind of erase this area here and talk about what happens when the renin is once released. So remember, once the renin is released, then you need to know that the liver synthesizes something called this is the liver. So it is going to synthesize something called angiotensinogen. Now this angiotensinogen is broken down by the renin and form angiotensin 1. Now this angiotensin 1 in the lungs there's an enzyme called angiotensin converting enzyme. This is going to convert angiotensin 1 to angiotensin 2. And remember, most of the things that occurs in the Raas system are mediated by angiotensin 2. This is the most important part of the Raas system. Now, let's talk about, let me erase this and just talk about what the Raas system is going to do. So you need to know all of the mechanisms, how renin leads to angiotensinogen, where angiotensinogen come from, then how the angiotensin 2 forms, where the angiotensin 2 comes from, and how the angiotensin 2 is formed, and it's in the lungs. The ACE enzyme, the angiotensin converting enzyme is in the lung. You need to know all of the origins of these things, like what synthesizes these enzymes. Now, so we were talking about angiotensin 2. Now let's say once angiotensin 2 is formed, remember, it has several effects. Remember, the effects are to increase sodium and water retention. That's the first one. Remember, once you have increased sodium and water reabsorption or retention, your blood pressure is going to rise, and that is the goal of the Raas system, is to increase the blood pressure. Now it does this by increasing the sodium and water reabsorption. That's the first mechanism, and we are going to talk about how it does it. The second mechanism by which it does it is increasing aldosterone release from the adrenal gland. The third mechanism, it increases ADH release, ADH from the posterior pituitary. Now ADH is going to cause increased water reabsorption. Remember, this is free water. There is no sodium here. Mostly, typically, when you reabsorb sodium, you reabsorb water with it, or when you reabsorb water, you reabsorb sodium with it. But ADH is an exception. Here, you only reabsorb water, and that's it. There's no sodium. So once you retain the water, it is going to increase the blood pressure. So that's the fourth thing that angiotensin does. Another mechanism is a vasoconstriction. It is a very powerful vasoconstriction that is also going to cause increased blood pressure. Remember, angiotensin acts through IP3 pathway. IP3 usually causes vasoconstriction, and these are GQ-linked receptors. Now, IP3 cause the vasoconstriction. You need to know that. Now, next, it does is something called activation. It activates in the proximal tubule. It activates the sodium and hydrogen exchanger. and we are going to talk about this, and this also leads to increased reabsorption. Now first let's talk about so remember, this mechanism can be linked to, like, here we can just discuss it here. This is one of the mechanisms by which it really increases the sodium and water reabsorption. So first is in the proximal tubule, it activates the sodium hydrogen exchanger, increases reabsorption. Second is the capillary effect, we will talk about in a bit. And the third is by the third way that it increases sodium and water reabsorption is aldosterone. It increases aldosterone release. These are the three mechanisms. So let's talk about one by one. All right. So now the first way by which the angiotensin increases sodium and water reabsorption is we are going to talk about is the capillary effect. So let's talk about what the capillary effect is. Now in the capillary effect, what happens is that remember, angiotensin 2, very important to know, angiotensin 2 preferentially constricts the efferent arteriole. Now once it constricts this efferent arteriole, it's going to rise the pressure here, the pressure in the glomerulus, and this is going to increase the glomerular filtration rate. So it's going to increase more filtration. There's more filtration of urine here, the more filtration of the blood here, and there's a lot of fluid buildup here. Now, a lot of fluid is building up here because there is more filtered because of the efferent constriction mediated by angiotensin 2. Now once that happens, then you have another thing that happens here is that once you have more volume coming in, more fluid coming in into this Bowman's capsule, into the nephron, then remember here the concentration of the protein is increased, so increasing the oncotic pressure. So remember, this is a continuation of this artery, of this like vessel. So here we have a lot of protein because most of the fluid is filtered out, so whatever that is remains is the protein. So most of the proteins is here. Second, you have decreased pressure because most of the fluid is filtered out. So remember, hydrostatic pressure is increased here. Remember, anything that increases the fluid, if you have more fluid in a one tube, that has more hydrostatic pressure. Remember, hydrostatic pressure is going to push this fluid out into this vessel, so increases sodium and water reabsorption. Second, this protein represent oncotic pressure. So remember, what oncotic pressure, these protein act as a sponge. It's gonna increase reabsorption of that. It's gonna pull that water and sodium from the nephron. So remember, there is more protein here because more of the fluid is lost here at the filter here in the glomerulus. So more protein is here in the vessel. It's going to pull that water. So these are the two mechanisms: increase hydrostatic pressure in the nephron, increase oncotic pressure in the vessel. Both of them contribute to pulling of those water and sodium and reabsorbing it back into the blood. So you have increased sodium and water reabsorption. This is called the capillary effect. Now the second effect by which angiotensin will lead to increased sodium and water reabsorption is the proximal tubule sodium and hydrogen exchanger. So now let's talk about this in a bit. So the sodium exchanger is in the proximal convoluted tubule. So if you draw a cell here, and let's say this is the lumen, the lumen of the nephron. This is the urine. This is the cell of the nephron, and this is the blood where it is reabsorption occurs. Now here we have some exchanger, and this is called the sodium, which puts the sodium in and gets the hydrogen out. So remember, this is activated by angiotensin. Now this is going to pull more sodium here, increase the concentration of sodium, and then here this sodium is kind of reabsorbed back into the blood. So remember, in the proximal tubule, angiotensin activates this sodium hydrogen exchange. So second mechanism is this of increasing sodium and water reabsorption back into the blood. Alright, so now let's talk about the third mechanism. And always remember that angiotensin 2 acts through a IP3 pathway. Now let's talk about the third thing that it does. So the third thing it involves the adrenal gland. So the third way by which increases sodium and water reabsorption is by the adrenal gland. So remember, angiotensin is going to come here to the adrenal cortex. Remember, adrenal cortex has 3 layers. We remember this by G, F, and R. So remember, glomerulosa, fasciculata, reticularis. The deeper you go, the sweeter it gets. That's how we remember what they release. And remember, glomerulosa is the more superficial. It releases aldosterone. fasciculata is in the middle, and it replaces cortisol. Remember, aldosterone is going to make you more salty. Cortisol is more sugary, so the bit deeper you go, the sweeter it gets. And then the reticularis is going to release androgens. All right. Now, this aldosterone, so remember, if this is your, let's say, one of the glomerulosa cell, this is one of the glomerulosa cell, the angiotensin 2 is going to come here, binds to its receptor here, and inside, once it binds, inside it activates phospholipase C. Once the phospholipase C is activated, remember, this is IP3 pathway. So, once the phospholipase C is activated, it's gonna in the cell membrane there is PIP2, phosphoinositol diphosphate. It's gonna break this down into IP3 and DAG. And remember, they are gonna go as a second messenger, act as a second messenger, and increase aldosterone synthesis in the glomerulosa. Remember, synthesis takes time, and this is why Raas system takes time. Synthesis of these hormones takes time. This is why Raas system is not as fast as the baroreceptor system. Now, this aldosterone is, remember, this one is this is lipid soluble. So remember, whenever a hormone is lipid soluble, it's going to rapidly cross the cell membrane, right? It does not need any carrier. It does not need any of that. It can just rapidly diffuse through the cell membrane. So now, remember, now once it's in the blood, it is going to bound, remember, it's not going to be just freely circulating. It's bound to albumin in the blood. Now, let's see what the aldosterone is going to do in the kidney. First, you need to know which part of the nephron it's going to act in. Remember, this is the proximal, this is the descending loop of Henle, this is the ascending, this is the distal. So remember, it acts primarily at the distal convoluted tubule. This is the site of action of aldosterone. So now let's see how aldosterone is going to act in the distal convoluted tubule. So now let's say we have this cell. This is a cell of the DCT. Remember, there are two types of cells. One are the intercalated cells, and one are the principal cells. So if this is the lumen, the principal cells is potassium. Remember, P for principal, P for potassium, and then I has the hydrogen. So remember, this is how you can know that the potassium channels are in the principal cells. So remember, aldosterone, like I said, it is gonna simply just cross. Remember, this is cell membrane, this is the nucleus, this is the cytosol. So remember, aldosterone does not need a membrane carrier. It can just rapidly, because it is lipid soluble, just like estrogen, progesterone, cortisol. So it can just rapidly cross this membrane, bind to its cytosolic in the cytoplasm receptor, goes to the DNA, goes to the nucleus, replicates the DNA for the potassium channels. Also, it comes here, goes to the nucleus, binding to the cytoplasm, increases replication of the hydrogen channels, and also here it also replicates the channels, the sodium channels, the ENaC channels, the sodium reabsorption channels. And once that happens, it's gonna excrete this potassium out into the urine, so cause hypokalemia. Second, it's gonna reabsorb the sodium, so increasing sodium reabsorption, so increasing blood pressure. And third, it's going to excrete this hydrogen out. So remember, potassium is excreted, hydrogen is excreted. Remember, the way that you know which cell these potassium channels are in, and this hydrogen, like I said, P for principal, P for potassium. So potassium channels are in the principal. This is where it is secreted. H is in the intercalated. This is where the H is lost. The acid is lost. So you get alkalosis, you get hypokalemia with increased aldosterone action. Now, so remember, you can also remember this by this, like there are two pillars of the H and they are intercalated. You know, this is just one way of kind of keeping it straight. So remember, then we commonly use the drugs, the ACE inhibitors, one of the highest yield drugs for any USMLE step exams. Remember, it is act as a antihypertensive. Also, it is used in diabetic nephropathy, decreases progression. Another drug that decreases progression of diabetic nephropathy is SGLT2 inhibitors. Now, remember, once this ACE inhibitor, this angiotensin converting enzyme, it also breaks down bradykinin. So remember, once you inhibit this, let's say you give inhibitor of this, the bradykinin is not broken down, which means it leads to increased bradykinin. If you have increased bradykinin, it is an irritant to the airway and it can cause cough. So if they say what is the next step, if remember, just switch from ACE inhibitors to angiotensin receptor blockers, because that way you retain the activity of of the angiotensin converting enzyme, which continues to break down the bradykinin. Bradykinin levels is low. There is no cough, but you get the benefit of this of the ACE inhibitor as well with the angiotensin receptor blocker. So if there is cough on ACE inhibitor, you just switch to angiotensin receptor blockers. Now, another thing you need to know is the Raas antagonist. Like, what will antagonize the Raas system? Raas antagonist. Remember, the Raas antagonist is the ANP and BNP. These are the Raas antagonists. And remember, these are Raas system retains sodium and water. This is going to cause diuresis and natriuresis. So it's going to increase the excretion of water and excretion of sodium and water from the body. Second, so Raas system causes vasoconstriction. ANP, BNP is going to cause vasodilation. Remember, ANP, first you need to know when is it released. So if this is your heart, this is the right atrium, this is the right ventricle, this is the left atrium, left ventricle. Remember, it is released by the stretch of the myocardium. So remember, once this stretch occurs, it means that there is more fluid here, right? This is a volume overload state. There is more fluid in the heart. So this stretch is going to cause release of ANP. ANP, remember, acts through the same, here it's going to come to the adrenals, and then it's going to decrease the release of aldosterone. Also, it's going to go and cause vasodilation. So remember, the way that it does it is increasing cyclic GMP. Remember, cyclic GMP, whenever you hear this as the second messenger, it's often a vasodilator. For example, there are two things you need to know about cyclic GMP. One is ANP and BNP. These act through the cyclic GMP, cause vasodilation. And another one is the nitric oxide. It also acts through cyclic GMP and causes vasodilation. So remember, whenever there is a cyclic GMP, acts through cyclic GMP, nitric oxide. So remember, cyclic GMP, ANP, BNP acts through cyclic GMP, and nitric oxide acts through cyclic GMP. Both are vasodilators. So remember, cyclic GMP in general, if they ask, it causes vasodilation. So remember, a lot of things can activate, like I said, low blood pressure, decreased sodium delivery, and sympathetic nervous system. So for example, they can give you vomiting, diarrhea, the road traffic accident, anything that leads to low blood pressure. Is it going to activate the Raas system? So hope this video was helpful. This is extremely high yield, especially remember, any step exam, this is high yield. So if anyone requires tutoring, they can email me here. Also, you can support the channel. Links will be in the description. So really appreciate you watching this video, and see you in the next one.